Soulwind TV presents.
Faith and Hope with Sweet Tea Sass, encouraging couples to reconnect with God and with each other so they can live their happily ever after too.
Hi everybody, welcome back to another episode of Sweet Tea
and Sass.
We are changing up our program a little bit. We feel that God is calling us a different direction here with our podcast. It'll still be podcast with Sweet Tea and Sass, but we're moving into a different topic dealing with marriage and how this affects people all over the world, and it's something that has really affected our lives, as we've mentioned several times in our earlier episodes of what we've been doing. But we are moving into marriages on the move.
So the podcast is now going to be Marriages on the Move with Sweet Tea and Sass, and we're going to change up our domain a little bit, and it's going to be marriagesonthemove.org. So you can find us at theclammongroup.com or marriagesonthemove.org.
Yes, and you can still find us on the YouTube channel, Jay Clammin, or you can find us on any of the other platforms that are out there, Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or X, whatever it's called now. And but
just under our name.
So without further ado, the Bible verse for today's talk is coming out of Genesis 12, where the Lord has said to Abraham, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you." So that is Genesis 12:1. And because of that verse and the way our marriage has been throughout our time together, we have been on the move, literally been on the move.
Yes. And it's been, I always told the kids when we were moving on our military moves that it was an adventure. It was just to consider it a 2 to 4 year vacation on the Air Force. And we got to see a different part of the country and spend a few years doing that. So, we try to look at it as an adventure. We try to look at the positive side of it, but there are a lot of negatives with that moving too. I mean, there's a lot of pros and cons. I know some of the things for me with moving and our military moves and everything was reestablishing myself. Every time we moved, I had to reestablish myself as an individual, as in a job, and get the kids reestablished in school and with friends and all those things. So it was constantly turning over a new leaf. And the way people ask me about it a lot of times, and I would tell them I felt like it was an Oreo cookie. The beginning, when you first get somewhere, is hard, and when you leave, it's hard, and the middle is the soft, gooey, fun part, the delicious part. Even though I don't even like Oreo cookies, but
that's a good way to describe it, though.
It is, because when you are leaving somewhere, you're leaving your friends, you're leaving what you have established, you're leaving what you've built there, and then when you get somewhere, you're reestablishing, and both of those are hard to do.
Right.
But the middle is where you get into a groove, and you get friends, and you get a church family, and you start moving along. Now, it was different for you, at least while we were moving, because you always had a new job that you were going to. So you had an established identity already.
Well, they knew who I was. They knew my rank. They knew my background. But I still had to come in and establish my
leadership
style and what the new unit expected from me and what I expected from the new unit moving to. So there was some familiarity there, but even then from that point of view, it was still difficult because you have all kinds of personalities when you're moving somewhere new, whether it's as a civilian, as spouses and kids, or as a military member.
Are you kidding me? There were different personalities in the house all the time.
That's true, and those varied from day to day
If
for
there's
sure.
more than one person in the house, there's difficulty in personalities.
Yes, and moving, changing jobs, even on the civilian side, changing jobs. Before I joined the military, I worked for a tire company, and the tire company I worked for had several different shops within the town that we lived in, Shreveport-Bossier. And within those several different shops, I changed locations 4 times. That we were when we first got married, and before I joined the military, I changed locations, like I said, 4 times. And even then, changing locations, you still have to establish who you are, what you know, and whether or not you can fit in with the supervision that's there. So moving is constant within our world today. Moving was constant back in the biblical time when God told Abraham, it's time for you to move and go someplace new and establish your family and the nation of Israel. And by God's blessings, he established that. And we are all descendants of that. Whether you want to believe it or not, you are a descendant of Abraham. So, and you are all part of that blessing. You were going to say something?
What about from a kid's perspective, moving, like when you were a kid and your dad in the military, moving, what were some of the challenges and things that you observed?
The biggest thing for me was changing schools. And
we didn't do that because we homeschooled. So we just changed where we did the school.
But for me, it was changing schools. My dad moved 14 times in his military career, and
we win.
We win.
We moved 17.
And in that 14 times that he moved, I was in 16 different schools.
Oh.
So it's, I guess as a youngster, first, second, third grade, really not hard. You just move in, say, hi, I'm new, and you just learn to adjust with the kids that are there. But junior high and high school, when you're really starting to develop your personality and who you are and what you're trying to figure out who you're going to be when you grow up. You're trying to figure out what you like to do, where you want, well, not so much where you want to live, but what you want to do for the rest of your life. You're trying to figure out that in that age group as a junior high school time frame, and not having lifelong friends and not having lifelong relationships as a youngster makes it more difficult in determining who you're going to be when you grow up. So for me, changing schools was probably the hardest thing to do. Moving to a new house was an adventure. I thought that was awesome, getting to pick my new bedroom and that kind of stuff in whatever house we were in. That was cool.
Being the oldest and the only boy, you always got your bedroom.
I always got my own room. So that was fun, but I didn't always get the location in the house that I wanted. But that being said, it was that was the biggest deal for me, was changing schools. And I know you moved several times as a kid too.
Yeah, we moved. Well, by the time I was probably just shy of 6 is when my biological mom took me from my grandmother and the family farm. And so that was my first experience in moving. And it wasn't a pleasant experience at all. Moved across the state. I wanted to be at home with my grandmother, where I'd always been, put in daycare and left. And so that was difficult. And then my mom had remarried, or had married my stepdad, and he wasn't just always a cup of sunshine. And so learning to live with him was different, and that was really hard. And then we moved. I have never sat down and counted it. We probably moved 8 to 10 times while I was growing up. And I don't really think about the difficulty of moving, because home life was so difficult.
Yeah.
That it was just difficult. It was just hard.
Yeah.
I mean, I just didn't have a break. great childhood, a great upbringing, unless I was at home on the family farm, which is
So
where I wanted to be.
your
So,
move was more of a, how much does this increase my stress level in
yeah,
my home life?
yeah, how much far more fighting is there going to be? How much
Right.
more upheaval and turmoil is there
Right.
going to be? It's just
So
not good. And but talking about your marriage and the stresses that moving can put on your marriage. I know for us, it was, when we first got somewhere, when we were leaving somewhere, it was kind of all hands on deck. We're
right.
all pitching in. We're all got to get this packed, got to get it loaded, at least until we got to the point where they were moving us and packing us and loading us.
And that's
And
a
then
whole different stress level
oh
there
gosh,
too.
because then you got to watch them like a hawk. They'll steal stuff, break stuff, and pack trash. And I mean, literally a bag of trash in the trash can, they will pack in a box. And then you'll open it how many ever months later you get to your home and so yeah, not fun. But I know the moving for us, it took a toll on our kids. And like you said, especially once they got to those middle school and high school years,
Yep.
even though they weren't in school, they still had their friends,
Yep.
their youth groups, they were established, and having to move them from that was really difficult. And the stress on the entire family, and just, I mean, for us too, I'm thinking about, sometimes we rented, sometimes we bought a house, so the stress of having to find a house to rent in a neighborhood, or find a house to buy in a neighborhood, and closing on the house and getting into the house. And at one point we were in a hotel for over a month. At 2 points we lived in a hotel for well over a month, waiting to get into a house.
Right.
And that was super hard.
Yep.
And being in that kind of a small confined quarters, and there being 5 of us in, and we had 2 hotel rooms because the Air Force allowed us as a family of 5 to have 2 hotels rooms with an adjoining door, but it was still really difficult. And I think outside of money, moving was probably the most stressful and the most difficult, and probably the most we were adversaries
Right.
in our marriage,
I would say so.
because of the stress, the external stress.
The external stress and the pressures of, got to make it happen now. We don't have time. Everything has come down to the last minute, and it's got to happen now.
Well, for
and-
me with the Air Force too,
Yeah.
it was,
Hurry up and wait.
well, here, you're going to be going here. And then, so you're thinking, okay, you're getting mentally ready. You start thinking about packing, you start getting stuff together. And then they drag around because you can't go until you have orders. And it's just like, just, if it, don't tell me we're going until you're ready to hand me papers and let's go.
Right.
The waiting, the anxiety of when it's going to happen, where are we moving, how are we going to get reestablished, and for me in particular, moving from Massachusetts to Michigan was probably the hardest move. Well, and Michigan back to Louisiana was hard, but for a different reason.
Right.
But moving to Michigan, when I had never been to Michigan, I didn't know anything about Michigan, and all I knew was the base was near Detroit, and I knew the bad things that they had said on the news about Detroit and all the things going on in Detroit. And then we land on the south side of Detroit and have to drive through all of the burned out buildings and
Yep.
the really ruins. It's ruins. That's what it is.
Yep.
It's and we had to, and I was just like, I cannot bring the kids here. I can't raise kids here. I can't do it. I can't do it. But yet when we did start looking for houses, we, on the north side of town and north of town, and then I started getting it was more rural.
The base was actually located closer to Algonac, Michigan, which is about an hour to an hour and 15 minutes north of Detroit. So we weren't actually in Detroit. It's just the initial shock of landing in that part of the state and not realizing the location of where the base was and where the hub of Detroit was at and all that kind of stuff. So that was a culture shock moving in there, is for me as well.
Yeah,
But
it
it's and then going from Louisiana to Minnesota was another difficult move because one, we had left Michigan, left our daughters in Michigan.
that was
That was probably the hardest move for both of us
they
because
were 18 and 20 and they did not want to move again, and they stayed, and we
They're
had
still
to
in
leave them
Michigan.
there. And that was so, I mean, when they say empty nest is hard, when you have to move off and leave your nest and 2 chicks there and they have to depend on themselves
Yeah,
to have a place to live, to eat, I mean, and they were good, responsible girls, but that was so hard.
yes,
And then when we got to Louisiana, we lived in our RV
for a
like
year,
over a year, I think.
about a year and a half, I guess, before we
Yeah.
found.
Oh,
It's
that
not
was
so much before we
hard.
found a house, but it's before we could afford a house
Right,
because the housing market took a dump on us
right, that was
just as we were leaving Michigan.
when the housing market
Michigan
went
and
down and we couldn't sell
so
our house in Michigan.
All those external
Yeah,
situations that happen that can drive a marriage apart if you don't focus on God and focus on God's plan and focus on what God has planned for you as a couple and your marriage, that will drive you bonkers if you let it.
right.
And you have to stay focused on the word. You have to stay focused on God's word. You have to stay focused on each other.
And get reestablished,
And
get established in a
quickly.
church, get established in a small group or a Sunday school, whatever, get established and start making friends and getting yourself into a routine and get plugged in. And I'm gonna be straight up honest with you. It was hard, and we didn't always do that. I mean, we always found a church
We
tried to find a church. It was hard in some areas because it was so different from what we were used to and what I grew up with, especially. But it was, it was hard, and I know I was angry a lot, and I probably took a lot of it out on you because I wasn't going to take it out on the kids.
Right.
And so and I did feel a lot of times like, this is your fault. You chose to do this Air Force thing, although we chose it, but it was for our family, but it was for his career. And I felt like I was making a whole bunch of sacrifices
Right.
for his career. And I felt like a lot of times I was making all these sacrifices and going through all this difficulty and turmoil without any appreciation, because oftentimes the spouse is not appreciated.
Right.
And the spouse gets just kind of pushed to the side. And I know for us, we were reserves and Department of Defense, so we didn't have the things that active duty spouses, the organizations and things that they had to plug into. They've tried to do that since, and they've had minimal success.
Only because from the reserves point of view, not everybody is right there at the base.
Well, you're 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks of summer. That's the commercial.
But it's, as a reservist, you have people in your unit coming from all over the country,
And usually spouses
and
don't
usually
come with them.
spouses don't come with them because they have kids and jobs of their own
Right.
that they're dealing with back home. So it's just the member that shows up, which creates a whole nother
A whole nother line of problems.
sense of chaos for a leader and a supervisor in the military world. But that's another topic for another day. But as a military spouse, like she said, active duty has a built-in support system on base for the members who are stationed there with their families.
Right.
But for a reservist, that's not always there for the spouse.
And many times they move on base, so they can plug right in
Yes.
there where they're at. For us, we couldn't do that. Actually, there were a few bases that had housing available that we could rent, but it was more expensive to rent a rundown house on base than it was to buy a house or rent off base.
Right.
So we always lived off base. We've never lived on base. And
Right.
so that was difficult. And so I know a lot of times I took my anger and frustration out on him because I blamed him. And it wasn't his fault. And it was a choice that we made together as a couple. But many times you just act out of those feelings that you're having in the moment. And so I want to encourage you to take a step back and do some journaling, do some soul searching, do some praying and spend time with God and figure out what the pros and cons are, figure out what the benefits are, where you want to serve, how God wants you to get to serve and to get plugged in, and then try to get plugged in. And I did it both ways. About half the time we moved, I did not have a job, and about half the time we moved, I had to find at least a part-time job. And so having to look for a new job, establish yourself in a new workplace, establish yourself in a new career, or not even in, I mean, I did what I had always done, but finding employment. And then you got new employee issues and boss issues, and all of those things take a toll on your marriage. So if you're a marriage on the move, if you're going through transition, and that's really what we're talking about. Marriage on the move is a marriage in transition. It's just a marriage that is transitioning into something else. You're moving into something else. You're going, like us a year and a half ago, we moved into an RV, sold everything and put everything in that we wanted to keep in a pod and moved into an RV and moved
2 years this month.
Yeah, he retired in December, so we were kind of still there, but then moved, from North Carolina to Texas.
Right.
And didn't know anybody here in Texas except for our son and daughter-in-law, which had also just moved here and gotten established. And so that was definitely a transition, and living in the RV was a transition. And like I told you yesterday, it's been 2 years and I'm getting kind of frustrated with the black space and being in everybody being in everybody's way. But this is what we've chosen to do. It's what's best for our life at this point in time.
Right.
But it's still hard, and we have to guard against getting angry with each other and taking it out on each other
Even though this is a choice we made together,
right.
It's still
hard.
It's hard, and you still have those lies that the enemy is throwing at you and trying to plant in your brain to turn around and attack each other.
Right. Because he's always instigating.
When it's a decision that you prayerfully made together to do what you're doing, which is best for your marriage at the time. And it can change 6 months, 8 months, 9 months, 2 years, 3 years. Who knows what the Lord's got planned for you in your marriage? You have to stay connected with God and seek Him all the time to figure out what He wants you to do and be sure that you are within His will within your marriage.
Right, exactly. So just think about that when those feelings and frustrations come up. Think about taking a step back and analyzing. And it's especially good to write, even if you just do a bullet journal and you just write bullet points of what you're feeling, what you're thinking, and then examine those and see what the source of those are, and take it to your spouse and discuss it with them. Because it's all about communication.
And the lack thereof can create a whole nother world of drama.
That's I think the biggest problem is the lack of communication. And I think so that's one of our topics that we're going to have coming up pretty soon is communication.
Yes.
And the different forms of communication. Yeah. Body language. So anyway, if you're a marriage on the move, a marriage in transition, just have hope that it's going to get better. You're going to adjust. It's hard, and it's hard leaving your home if you're moving away from home for the first time, and your family and all those things. But try to look at the new location as an adventure. There are so many things I learned about our country and about our world and about the people in it that are so valuable to me. So try to, instead of looking at it as a negative, try to look at it as an adventure, as a positive, as I get to do this, because so many people don't. And I think there's just as many, and we could probably do another podcast on this, just as many difficulties for marriages who stay where they're at where they grew up, where they're established, and they don't move away.
Yeah.
We've often said that we probably did better in our marriage
By
because,
moving.
well, both of our parents moved away from
Right.
where we were.
Right.
Yours moved just a few days after we got married, and then mine moved a couple of years later
Right.
to another part of the country. And I think that really benefited us. So
Yeah.
this move may be God's growing your marriage. And when you think about growth is hard, growth is difficult, growth hurts, but it's beneficial once you get through the transition of it. So just think about that as you're going forward and your marriage is in transition or your marriage is on the move.
So with that being said, we want to close out this episode of Marriages on the Move with yours truly, Sweet Tea.
And Sass.
And we will see you guys next time on the next episode. Love y'all.
Bye.